Welcome to another edition of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 37 years. And I've been sharing some of the things with you that I'm finding by doing a little bit of research and looking into some topics of interest. And a couple of videos ago, I talked about the promise of BTK inhibitors in the treatment of multiple sclerosis and possibly even the cure for it. So that's pretty exciting. Just recently, though, I received an article in my inbox. I subscribe to something called Medscape, and this article came recently, just the other day, as you can see, April 26th. And it talks about how multiple sclerosis drug development is being hit by the Ukraine war. So I'm just going to look at some parts of this and share what the news is, according to Roche, which is the company that's sponsoring this clinical trial. And this is out of Reuters in Frankfurt. So Roche has warned that Russia's attack on Ukraine is disrupting the development of a new generation of multiple sclerosis drugs, as the industry has come to disproportionately rely on Eastern Europe for clinical trials. And that's a piece of news I didn't really even know, that clinical trials draw a lot of their participants from countries in Eastern Europe. It says that the pharmaceutical industry has been scrambling to find ways to keep patients in Ukraine enrolled in various clinical trials, as millions have fled the war and sought shelter in neighboring countries. Here's a quote: "Both Ukraine and Russia historically have been very important contributors to clinical trials for patients with neurological disorders, such as multiple sclerosis," the head of Roche's pharmaceutical division, Bill Anderson, told reporters on a call after the release of first quarter sales. Here's an important piece of information. About 20% to 30% of patients in the global fenebrutinib MS trial program have been from Ukraine and Russia. And I think that's important to know. Like I said, I wasn't aware of that. I don't know whether that even skews the data a little bit to have that many participants from one part of the world, when we really perhaps ought to be looking at a wider, a more diverse base of participants. But then again, clinical trials, you can't force someone to be in a trial, and perhaps folks in Russia and Ukraine have been more quick to volunteer to be part of these clinical trials. The article goes on. It said it was opening sites in additional countries, recruiting for additional sites in countries where we do have clinical trials, and recruiting patients into existing sites faster. Now, if you're in the United States, for example, I know there are clinical trials going on for this particular BTK inhibitor. So if you're interested, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov, as I've talked about before, and you could look for one that's kind of near you if you'd like to help them as they scramble to try and keep this clinical trial going. Here's the explanation. Eastern Europe is an attractive trial location because investigators running medical centers are well trained, and patients have a strong incentive to volunteer as participants because they often stand to receive better care than what the health system offers. Okay, now that's interesting, and that helps me understand a little more why proportionally, there are so many volunteers from Ukraine. And it says that others in the industry have also cited low study costs. And here's a quote from Anderson again: "I think this is generally true for other companies that are investigating medicines in MS." And he said that the timing of the expected MS trial results, at least for this year, would not be delayed. So fortunately, they were able to collect enough data for this year's testing that they will be able to analyze those results and get them out. Is fenebrutinib showing promise, as we all are hoping, in MS, and warranting us to continue on in the clinical trials. Apart from ongoing trials of launched MS drug Ocrevus, Roche is testing on volunteers the experimental drug fenebrutinib, part of a class known as BTK inhibitors, which has attracted several rival developers. I didn't realize this too, but the trials on Ocrevus are still ongoing. Even though it's out in the marketplace, Roche continues to do clinical trials on probably safety, long-term effects, efficacy, and so on. And I imagine that would be pretty standard across the industry, but interesting to know. The last part here, I think we talked about in my earlier video, but MS has seen dynamic development efforts over the last decade, resulting in a wide range of new pills and shots, but the industry is looking at a more targeted approach in the form of BTK inhibitors designed to halt the immune cells that damage connective fibers between nerve cells in MS patients. That doesn't as much get to the heart of the excitement that we have over BTK inhibitors, but it really does get to this idea that I've talked about before, that Dr. Gavin Giovannoni has talked about, the idea of smoldering MS, that MS is really rooted down in the organelles of each individual cell in the brain, and that we need something that will cross that blood-brain barrier and will target those exact parts of the cell where the smoldering MS is still causing a lot of damage. And then finally, it's probably just good to know that we're not totally dependent on Roche. There are other contenders for getting these BTK inhibitors out into the market. Names like Merck, KGaA, Sanofi, and Novartis. Most of those are names that you have heard before. Perhaps the medicine that you're on is made by one of those pharmaceutical companies. That's kind of the long and the short of it at this point. And as you can see, it doesn't really matter what your politics are or what side you come down on about war, whether this particular war is right or wrong, or who's the aggressor here, or any of that. It doesn't really matter. It shows you that in addition to really serious problems that war causes from the human level, in terms of refugees, in terms of food shortages, in terms of medical care for urgent needs, other things like that, which I would argue are more important, they're more critical than whether or not we get BTK inhibitors in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. But it's still a good reminder that war has lots of costs, and science is definitely a casualty of war sometimes, because science is done by people, and when people are not free to investigate something, then the experiment doesn't get to go forward. That's just something to keep in mind. Well, that's really all I had. I just wanted to share that with you. We don't know what all the impacts will be, but as eagerly as many of us are waiting to find out results of some of these clinical trials, it is a little dismaying to see that those might be hindered by what's going on in the political world, in the realm of war and just general international politics. It could be the Ukraine war, but it might easily be something else as well, with all the sanctions and embargoes and things that are going on in the world. And we don't often think about that when we're excited about clinical trials and new research and new developments in MS. But I'm hopeful that this will not impede the ultimate outcome of these trials. Other BTK inhibitors also are in clinical trial, and they also will be getting ready to come to market within a few years. That's my hope. I'm looking forward to that, and I know you are too. Well, that's all I have for us today. Thank you so much for watching. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you again in my next video.